Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell Rucker. I'm the author of Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic, which is on the poster right behind me. And I'm also the author of Our Founders and Their Words and Why They Matter. And there's a poster over to my left here showing that. Those two books were really meant to be bookmates to each other. I studied the Constitution and theory and original intent most of my adult life for at least 40 years or so. And I've read numerous original texts, not just the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but Common Sense by Thomas Paine, Rights of Man, which is one of his work, letters from the farmers in Pennsylvania, among many other original texts when they were determining self-government. So I do have a little knowledge of our Constitution, the era in which it was created. And I mean, that's really my prime focus. I'd like to thank Reader's Magnet for this opportunity to be on the Festival of Storytellers. I really think it's a wonderful event. And those that were here yesterday, I'd like to thank you for returning. We were talking about George Washington yesterday, but today we're going to get into the Constitution itself. Textualism and Originalism, the book that I wrote, defines it. It goes through it paragraph by paragraph, explaining the Constitution. Textualism needs to be defined. Okay, and textualism is when you're reading the text. Now, I have beside me a set of law books, state statute books, and every state has their own statutes. And you have municipal ordinances, whether you live in a city, a village, a town. So you have municipal ordinances that are also part of the law. And then you have federal statutes. So what you find in statute books, you'll find things against murder all the way down to a traffic sign, because it kind of fills it up. Our Constitution is basically a framework. So they create a framework, and over the last couple hundred years, they filled that framework in. The textualism is reading whatever statute or whatever part you're reading and believing that it says exactly what it says. So a lot of times the word shall or may be used. And may is far different than shall. Shall means you must do whatever that is. May means it's a possibility. So it's a really important to follow the text so you understand exactly what we're talking about. Originalism is a bit different because originalism looks at the original reason for the passage of it to begin with. Original intent. What were they trying to do? What arguments were they having in Congress when they passed certain amendments? All these things lead us back to originalism, and it gives us an original intent, and goes to whatever was happening at the time, whatever event the purpose of that amendment may be. Okay, so you have the original Constitution between we the people and the signatures, and that's the original section. Then you have the Bill of Rights, and that is your first 10 amendments. Now, another thing that I want to mention here that I think is kind of important is a lot of people believe that we're in a democracy. And we aren't in a democracy. We're in a constitutional republic. And the difference is like a referendum question that may be before you when you go down to vote. And it could be anything from, deciding whether to hire more law officers, whether to change your form of municipal government, or whether to build some section or give more money to a school district. But when you're voting on a referendum question, unless it's an advisory referendum question, if it's a regular referendum question, that's a direct democracy. A republic is when you elect someone to make decisions for you, like your president, your House members, your senators. And when you elect people to represent you, that's a republic. Now, there was a lot of talk during the revolution, a lot of complaints that we were being governed without representation because we didn't have anybody in England to speak on our behalf. And that was one of the big problems. And that's one of the reasons we have what we have today. And our Constitution is not the first Constitution we had. It's our second, because we started in late 1777 with an Articles of Confederation. So we had a loose confederation of states, and we governed in that way. And that's when we had our Continental Congress. And then originally, and then the Congress of the Confederation. And then we went about trying to get changes to the Articles of Confederation, and that's where we got into the Constitutional Convention, and that's where we get our Constitution from. Now, there have been a number of amendments over the years, and there have been 33 amendments, and 27 of them have passed. 4 are still active out there, and probably will never be passed, because there's just no interest to pass them. But of the 33 amendments, you have the first 10 are the Bill of Rights. And when you talk about, like, I'm going to skip over the First and Second Amendment because we're going to do shows on that next week. But when you get to the Third Amendment, you're talking about housing soldiers, okay, because that's what England did. And so here we go to the original intent of the amendment, because we are trying to correct the idea of housing soldiers in people's homes, barns, outbuildings. Okay, guys, this is a law that England passed and forced on us. So that's the purpose of the Third Amendment. So it's important to understand why we have this restriction, and it does not allow our government, our federal government, to do this. When you get to the Fourth through the Eighth Amendments, that's the rights of the accused. So You have a right to a speedy trial. You have a right not to have to testify against yourself. You have a right to an attorney. You have rights in the fourth of the process of gathering information to prosecute you to begin with. Like you have to have a warrant. It can't be so broad. It has to be defined. All these things are the rights of the accused. You get into the moving on, you get into the Ninth Amendment, and they're saying just because it isn't here listed, it isn't defined here, doesn't mean you don't have these rights. So what this is it's a nod to natural law or nature's law. See, the founders believed that you had God-given rights. And so these rights, they were saying, just because it's not listed here doesn't mean you don't retain these rights. The 10th Amendment rounds it off and says that if it's not restricted and if it's not given to the federal government and restricted by the states, means that it's those rights belong to the states and to the people. So if it's not mentioned, then the state governments have the right to act upon whatever it is that we're talking about. So you get into lots of different things there. A lot of even just simple traffic ordinances and building codes and all these things all belong to the state and the municipality going down. So it's kind of a jurisdictional kind of thing. Okay. The 11th Amendment comes out of a Supreme Court case, Chisholm versus Georgia. And the case did not go the way Georgia wanted. And Georgia was found that they owed quite a bit of money for things that they had purchased during the Revolutionary War. So they lost their case, and Congress passed an amendment, sent it to the states so that a citizen of one state can't sue a citizen of another state. And a foreigner cannot sue in our courts. And that's the 11th. The 12th we're going to talk about later too on another show. So I'm going to skip over that. It has to do with an update to the Electoral College. And then we get into the Civil War and your 13th through 15th Amendments, which basically deal with slavery, making the children of slaves legal citizens, giving them the right to vote, giving them the rights under color of law, and all these things, making them equal citizens. The 16th has to do with income taxes. The 17th allows senators to be directly elected. So you begin with senators were elected by the state legislatures and appointed by the state. The Senate was supposed to represent the states, and the House members are supposed to represent the people. That goes all the way back into the convention where we're talking about compromise that they made, because many of them wanted representatives by population, and some of the smaller states wanted protections so that they wouldn't get run over. That's pretty much the situation there. Then we get into prohibition and removal of prohibition, the 18th and the 21st. The problem with prohibition wasn't that we prohibited the sale of alcohol. It's that organized crime got a real foothold, and it became a very big problem. Then the 19th is giving women the right to vote. And then we have, of course, the 26th gives 18-year-olds the right to vote. The 22nd goes to the presidential term. It changes the date in which a president begins from March to January, and it changes the times when your House and Senate members start their term. So that goes to the 22nd. The 23rd allows the District of Columbia to act as a state for the purposes of the Electoral College. You see, the problem with DC statehood was that the founders never wanted a DC to become a state because they feared that our representatives would move their wives and families out to DC, live there, and wind up representing the district rather than the state in which they came from. So they were opposed to that. But here they allow it so that they have electoral votes to elect a president. The 24th restricts a poll tax. Poll taxes were set up mostly by our southern states, the Jim Crow laws they're called, and they were meant to restrict minorities from voting. And so this was passed to stop that. The 25th has to do with the line of secession. So then we get down to the 27th Amendment. And the 27th Amendment is one of those amendments that was the original Bill of Rights. It basically says that if Congress passes a pay raise, they can't get the pay raise until after an election of the House of Representatives happens. So they would have to face the voters before they get the pay raise. There is one other amendment out there, one of these four that I earlier mentioned, that is part of the Bill of Rights, and it has to do with the numbers of people that would represent us in the House of Representatives. And if that was ever passed, it would make that much larger. Now, I really want to explain the original section of our Constitution because it has so much in there. You have the Electoral College, you have the president and the vice president and their way of serving. And some of the original plans, they wanted more than one president at the same time. They wanted a president that served for life. So here we have it so that he can only serve for a 4-year term. That's in Article 2. In Article 1, it's discussed all the duties and roles of your legislative branch. And your legislative branch is divided into two sections. You have the House and the Senate. And the reason we're dividing all these groups up, and the reason we have an independent judiciary and an independent executive, all this is to split up power among different groups, giving power divided up so that no one person can get too much power. There's even a restriction against a sitting senator or House member to get a job in government. So if he takes a government job, he has to leave his seat in the House or the Senate. And this is also, nobody can achieve too much power. Now, as far as the House, the People's House, being by a population, and the Senate being by state, this is part of a big compromise. They argued probably half the time in the convention, and they were pretty much at a stalemate. Benjamin Franklin even asked for prayers from clergy to try to get past the bypass. Finally, they set up a commission, a sort of commission. They set up a committee to see and try, and this is what they came back with, was a compromise. So we have both systems. See, your Articles of Confederation in the Continental Congress voted by states. So you had in the Continental Congress between 3 and 7 representatives, but you only had one shared vote. So this, when you went to vote, you had to make a decision on how you were going to vote, meet as a committee of all your members in the state, and then you had to cast your one vote. So each state only had one vote. So this was a problem to get past this. And a lot of our founders wanted a population vote. The problem was states like Delaware, Connecticut, those kind of places, they were small states. They could not really grow. And they wanted some guarantee that they wouldn't get run over. And this is why you have your separation inside the inside the legislative branch. And they split up even the duties so that all spending bills, all taxing bills would have to start in the House. And like treaties and things of this nature would have to go to the Senate. The approval of your judicial appointments all go to the Senate. So the Senate has the power to make appointments. And if we have a problem with a president or another official, another member of his cabinet, say, or another elected official or a judge, they can be impeached. And the House has the power, has the sole power of impeachment. But once they bring an impeachment, and an impeachment is only bringing on formal charges, it's not removal. That is done by the Senate in a trial. So House brings the charges, and then it moves over to the Senate for the trial. And the only thing they can do is remove the president or restrict him from holding office later. That's the only possible thing they can do. And they only have three things that they can impeach for: bribery, treason, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And other high crimes and misdemeanors really was meant to encompass treason against a state. Rufus King made the argument, he's one of our founders, and he made the argument that we needed something to deal with treason against the state, because they felt that there could not be treason against the state. It would have to be treason against the country. So that's the purpose for that. And the Constitution even defines treason: aiding and comforting an enemy. And there are two or three things there that actually define treason. So we actually have constitutional reasoning for what is possible to impeach someone. It really can't be some just hunting down somebody for political reasons. So I mean that's an important distinction. The other thing that makes our Constitution so unique and why it's lasted so long is they kept it, as they called, perpetual, so that it would go on forever, not just for a small, period of time, say 30 or 50 years, and then they'd change it. They wanted to make it perpetual, and that's why you have amendments. And they allow you to amend things in two ways. One is the House and Senate would have to pass amendments, and 3/4 of the states would have to go along with it. The other is allowing for a convention of states. And today there is a movement for a convention of states out there. There's a whole organized group that wants a convention of states to discuss certain amendments. And once they met, then it would have to go to the states to approve whatever amendments they decided. So they made the Constitution a perpetual document. And what I find really interesting is when you look at the original Constitution that was done by the Committee of Style and Arrangement, the capitalization even in the document shows you what they felt was important. And I know I'm running a little short of time here, and I want to get to some of the questions that we've had. So I'll go with that. Melissa, what I am most interested in is the resource material for this book and how you organized all the essays into one material. Well, I started with the holidays and what I thought was important about them, and then I looked it up for actual wording and quotes to show what it was. I used all kinds of resource material. I used books on quotations. I used arguments in the convention. I used the records of the convention that was put out over 100 years ago to get arguments. I used things like common sense for, when I mentioned Thomas Paine. I looked up a lot of different founders that I thought were important. I looked at who signed the Declaration of Independence, and I looked at people up, and I decided, who do I want to talk about to help tell this story? And so there was a lot of resource material like that. Ethan says, this is my first time attending your live talks. It's interesting to learn more about textualism and how it differs from originalism. Well, I'm glad that you're here, Ethan. And I guess my argument is taking textualism and originalism together versus a living, breathing document. Because if you go by, and I was taught the living, breathing theory in school, along with pretty much everyone else. And I've kind of rejected that once I started reading, and I realized that it's really easy to read and understand. And I don't think we should have an overwhelming group that just tells us what is without looking at the Constitution for guidance. And I think that's what's important, looking to the original document. So I hope that that helps you. And Pauline, in order to understand the country, we must look back into the past and how it was focused. And I agree with you. That's exactly what we should be doing. We should be looking at what happened and why. And that's why when I bring up like the Third Amendment and the Quartering Act, I think it's important to understand why that was occurring. And in the same way with all these other amendments, sections of our Constitution, they all become important. It's January. And soon we're going to have a speech in Congress, a State of the Union address. And the State of the Union address is ordered by the Constitution. And it's not really meant to be a political speech. It's a directive to Congress of what we need and what our state of the union is. In the Constitutional Convention, there was a lot of talk about the State of the Union. And that was one of the first things that would be brought up. So I just want to be sure I get to everybody here. Jeffrey says, it must have taken a lot of research and time to complete your work. Well, it has. And honestly, the research never really ends. I'm always looking up something else. I'm always trying to really understand. And reading some of these very old manuscripts and books have helped me to understand things. I don't have a lot of time here, and I need to refocus a little bit. And tomorrow, I just want you to know that I'm going to be discussing the parties inside Washington's cabinet, because that's really where our two-party system comes from. I do have a website, russelljrucker.com. You can even get a signed copy of either one of my books. I have a friends group on Facebook that discusses constitutional interests. It's called Friends of Textualism and Originalism. You can also get my book through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes and Noble, and I've also do a broadcast from my studio. This is my studio. And I do a broadcast on YouTube. I drop a video every week discussing some part of the Constitution, the history around it, or an amendment. So I'd be happy if you join me on that. You can just search my name, Russell Rucker, and you'll find that. But I'm out of time, and please join me tomorrow, and have a good afternoon. And thank you very much for being here, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Thank you.